Okay, today we're going to be talking about sponsorship and putting it into context with the hypoism paradigm of addiction. And here with us today, Dr. Dan Humanoff, the author of the Hypoics Handbook.
Hypoics Handbook, not the. One thing we can do with Hypoics Handbook and the hypoism paradigm of addictions is put recovery in context with a broken brain mechanism that causes addictions. That's my model of the disease of addictions. I have a brain mechanism that has been warped by genetic alterations in its regulation, and out comes addictions, otherwise known as an addiction machine in your brain. And in order to do recovery, you need to recover from that specific disease. Not some made-up mumbo-jumbo nonsense.
Mumbo-jumbo nonsense, like some sort of spiritual disease?
Right. We have a real biological disease like every other disease that you go to your doctor about. You go to your doctor, you have no problem with physical diseases about every other known disease, thousands of them. You can look them up in a textbook of medicine. They all have a physical basis. Guess what? The disease of addictions, hypoism, has a physical basis also. And the recovery of this disease has to deal with that physical basis. In order to understand that physical basis of this disease, you need to go and read Hypoics Handbook, or my website, and the various papers that I have on the website in regards to the physical, biological disease that causes all addictions. You cannot start with a recovery for a non-entity and expect to come out with recovering people. In order to recover, you need to know what your disease is physically, not spiritually.
So
the only reason there's a spiritual cause of this disease is because they didn't know the physical cause of it. So they went right to the spiritual. And that's why we're in the mess we are today. We have no basis, no physical basis for recovery.
So the huge failure rate that we see now, as evidenced by increasing amounts of people in prison and jail and detoxes and treatment centers
and dying
and
suffering
and spousal abuse and all of these other symptoms.
Thousands of different things that you wouldn't even think of.
So thousands of different things, and so they all stem from the same place.
Right.
So
and they all stem from a physical disease, not a spiritual disease. Just like diabetes, just like high blood pressure, just like cancer, etc., etc., etc. Go through the medical textbook. We have physical, biological diseases. This is the same thing. And it turns out that the physical basis of this disease is what I call the instinct regulating mechanism or apparatus in the brain that is warped by genetic changes in its regulation. This particular apparatus in the brain deals with drugs, which are neurotransmitter substitutes for the natural neurotransmitters, as well as the instincts, which cause the behavioral addictions. Every instinct is associated with a behavioral addiction. They are equal to drug addictions. The drugs are neurotransmitter substitutes for neurotransmitters that are part of the deficiency, the reward activity deficiency, and the instincts, which are the reason the regulatory apparatus is there to begin with, to regulate instincts, and the excessive use of instincts because they raise dopamine activity, which is what our deficiency is in. So it all makes sense. And I dissected what I thought was a good model of the instinct regulatory mechanism. And I found different parts of it, and I go through all the parts of it in the book and on the website, and dissect out where the treatment needs to focus on. And what I found was a particular place that I call the autonomous thinking belief, where you believe your own thinking, even though it's addictive thinking, even though it's caused by the disease. You believe it as if it were true, as if it were a hallucination or a delusion. No different from schizophrenic delusions or hallucinations that are also believed. It's the autonomous thinking belief. It's on its own. That's what autonomous means. And you believe what that part of the brain tells you, and you run your life accordingly. That's where we intervene in this disease. We intervene on the autonomous thinking belief, and we do it with what we call a sponsor. No different from the AA sponsor, except we use him, her, completely to do the recovery.
What do you mean by completely?
The sponsee-sponsor relationship is the basis of the recovery. There's no recovery in meetings other than the good feelings you get from fellowship. Meetings are used for discussing your recovery, how you're doing it, improving methodology. Eventually, we will use meetings for studying the disease, studying how we recover so that we can improve recovery, whatever. For the most part, the recovery is based on the sponsor-sponsee relationship. And that becomes the model of the recovery, where the sponsee shares everything, feelings, thoughts, plans of behavior with the sponsor, and the sponsor makes decisions. The sponsor is also required to have a sponsor. The sponsor is required to be doing recovery. Um,
Okay, what about people being sponsored? You know, people come out of treatment centers and jails and detoxes around the country, and they don't know what to do, you know, and they're looking around, and they, you know, may get a sponsor, but have no idea what the role of the sponsor is. And
the problem is that the problem with what you're talking about is related to the fact that we have a vague paradigm of causation, of addiction causation. We don't have a paradigm. It's this so-called multifaceted causation paradigm of anything from the drug causing an addiction to a spiritual defect, and all areas in between the two. There's no paradigm. There's no concept of brain mechanism. There's no understanding of the causation at all, because the current paradigm started as a treatment paradigm rather than as a pathophysiological paradigm. And that's the difference between what I do and what everyone else does. I have a pathophysiology to start with, and I understand that the disease as a brain mechanism problem, and I can go into that brain mechanism and look for recovery mechanism based on the brain mechanism, and I can test them, and I can come up with a treatment based on a rationale rather than a made up superstition based rationale that people can't put their finger on. There are 12 steps, they have other things, so they have suggestions. Nowhere in medicine is any disease run this way. Medicine is based on pathophysiology, and recovery of that pathophysiology is based on interfering with the disease mechanism so that it's not causing disease anymore, it's causing recovery from the disease. And it turns out that in this particular disease, the recovery is based on a person being in control of another person's decision making, and not their own. That person has to have someone else as well. So it's about decision making and alteration of decision making, because that's where the disease originates.